Every holiday shopper's got a list, but Ross shoppers, you've got a mission. Like a gift run that turns into a disco snow globe, throw pillows, and PJs for the whole family, dog included. At Ross, holiday magic isn't about spending more, it's about giving more for less. Ross, work your magic.
Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery. That's greenlight.com/Wondery.
Hey, fans of freedom and open discussion, I'm heading over to Substack, and there's an ad-free audio and video version of the Adam Carolla Show that's going to be waiting there. In the near future, you'll even be able to watch ACS Live, unedited, as we record it, participate in the show via live chat. That'll be coming up very soon. You'll also get an ad-free version of the Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew Show. You'll also get an exclusive to my new podcast, Beat It Out, where I share unpolished ideas with my comedian buddies. The first series of episodes is going to be Jay Moore. You'll get all this and more for the low, low price of $9 a month, a pittance for all we're going to bring you. Subscribe now at adamcarolla.com/Substack, and I'll see all of you in our new speakeasy called Substack.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutors Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutors Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my neighborly co-host, Brett.
Hello, neighbor. How are you?
Hello, neighbor. I hope that you are the neighbor like Mr. Rogers wants us to be, and not like the neighbor in a very sad case that we're going to talk about today, that of the abduction and murder of Michael Vaughan, who was just a 5-year-old when he was taken. And he's still not found to this day. So there's no body yet. But notice I did say abduction and murder.
Yes, because there's no body, but apparently there is a crime and there is a prosecution that's going to happen in this case. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about it in the idea of no body crimes. Like, how do you prosecute those cases? What do they mean? What does it show us about what reasonable doubt means? All that sort of stuff. And this is a case that's very much developing. We don't have a ton of information. We're going to tell you what we know. It's been going on for years. It's probably a case that some of you are familiar with. But essentially, this case comes to us from Idaho. And you have every parent's nightmare. You have a child who seemingly just vanishes into thin air in a very short period of time. And this is a situation where we know we have a crime because ordinarily 5-year-olds don't just disappear. Though we're going to talk about that. I mean, when you do a no-body case, proving a crime happened is a part of it. And as we know, 5-year-olds can just wander off. We'll talk about that. But this isn't a case where you have a really bloody crime scene, but no body. It's not a Lacey Peterson type case where you have every indication of a murder. That case was going to be a no-body case until the body showed up. And really, I don't know that there ever would have been a case without that. But nevertheless, you don't have a struggle. You don't have any of that sort of stuff. Really, you just have no trace. You have an absolute disappearance. And yet, just this week, prosecutors announced murder charges that we are going to talk about. And I think the question, I'm sure on most people's minds, is how do you convict somebody of murder when you don't even have the victim? When you don't have a body, you don't have proof positive that a murder even occurred. And is that in of itself reasonable doubt, that very fact that you don't have proof positive of even a death, much less a murder? So we're going to talk about that in the context of this case.
But let's take us back, because this case has been cold for a while, but it's relatively recent. It was July 27th, 2021 in Fruitland, Idaho. This was your typical quiet, family-oriented, small-town neighborhood. And they were tight-knit. It was a good community to raise kids. And that's exactly where Michael, known as Monkey, was being raised with his little sister. He was just 5 years old, and I have a 5-year-old boy, so this hits very close to home. I know how vivacious they are, how communicative they are, but also how mobile they are. My kids have a pretty free-range life as well. Our doors are open on the weekends. If I'm in the kitchen cooking, they're running down and fishing with their little nets in the pond across the street from our house. They're in the backyard. They go to neighbors' houses. This is pretty typical in my town. And that's the kind of life that Michael had as well. He was only 5, but he could go outside if he wanted. And in fact, his father would report that he had to clean up a messy diaper for his little sister. And it was particularly messy, so it took a little longer than usual. It took about 5 or 10 minutes. And he actually ordered a pizza while he was off cleaning the diaper. But in that incredibly short amount of time, when his father walked back out into the living room, he couldn't find Michael. Michael was suddenly gone. Immediately, he calls the police and he calls his wife, who was not home at the time. His wife immediately leaves work and comes home. This is every parent's worst nightmare. So the timeline is incredibly short here.
And let me just say, he actually calls the police way faster than I would have. There was one time that my daughter decided she was going to hide from us, but we didn't know we were playing that game. And so we couldn't find her, and we were calling her name and walking around, getting more and more sort of worked up. And then finally, I checked the one place we hadn't checked, and there she was, right? And she was just playing a game with us, and we were like, let's not do that anymore. Because, I mean, you know how it feels. Those of you who have parents, or if you have kids in your life you care about, and you turn around and they're gone, whether it's in the house or at the fair or wherever, you get that sinking feeling, that horrible dread. You can't find them. They're not in your sight line. You start to freak out. But typically, you don't immediately call the police, right? But in this circumstance, he does. And there's a lot about this case that I have questions about. And there's a lot about this case we just don't know the answer to. And I think a lot of that will be fleshed out at trial. But I'm interested to hear, when there is a trial, if there is a trial, his story of how this went down. Because it doesn't make perfect sense to me. And I'm not necessarily casting suspicion on him, though obviously the first person you're going to suspect would be the parent who was with the child at the time. But it very quickly escalates from, I don't know where my son went, to calling the police, all hands on deck, mom's coming home from work, and we're launching this massive search.
Yeah, I think, and because we know so little publicly right now, because they just announced an arrest this week, really quickly, without knowing more, I think it can cut both ways. Really interesting. You immediately call the police, indicates you have very little timeline. Father is last to see him alive. Seems like a very, very tight timeline, especially with a baby with him, to be able to do something to Michael and dispose of the body before calling the police. Also, why call the police so quickly? You could say that you've been playing for a while, or that, you know, the bath took longer because the diaper took longer and you had to go throw the clothes in the laundry, buy yourself more time. So it seems to cut against the father. On the other hand, like Brett just said, there may be people on the jury who think, why would you call the police so quickly? Why were you so sure within 5 minutes something bad had happened? Especially when this is a child who seems it's okay for him to walk outside, for example. And my kids constantly hide from me as well. Or they just can't hear me, right? Like, as you guys know, we make good use of our closets in this house. I record in closets. A Lego room is in a closet. My kids play in closets. Sometimes they just don't hear me either. So that's also really interesting, that within minutes, there's already an indication that something is wrong. And that may indicate that the timeline is not as tight as we are told upon first glance. Maybe there has been more time, but the timeline was shortened for purposes of creating an alibi. Not casting anything on the father, but simply saying little information makes it cut both ways.
Many of you, like Alice, are thinking the same thing. Could the father be not telling us the whole truth? It wasn't really 10 minutes. That's the stories he made up, but, something happened to the child an hour, 2 hours before, he's covering up, and now he's just calling the police. We do know, though, that apparently Michael had gone over to a neighbor's house and asked to play with that neighbor's children. The timing on that is not 100% locked down, because I don't think the neighbor really was looking at the clock and thinking about it, but it's not like an hour before. We're talking, 15 minutes before this disappearance. He's talking to the neighbor. The neighbor, for whatever reason, says no, they can't really play right now, and watches him sort of walk back towards his house. So we know that Michael was alive and was outside in a relatively close time frame to when his father says he went missing. So I think Alice is right. As suspicious as this sounds initially, he almost has a rock solid alibi because of all the other stuff that's going on around here. He really doesn't have time to do anything.
So he calls the police, like this timeline, right? There's no delay. To be very frank, with a 5-year-old, I'm not going to wait very long either. And the response is immediate. They launch a massive search operation because we are talking about a young child. It is, no amount of time outside, especially as it gets dark, is going to be safe for a child. Local volunteers show up. They're flying drones. They bring in canines. They are putting all their resources on this because, as with missing children's cases, you need to find them ASAP. Whether it's a lost child situation, because the elements, even though it's July in Idaho, should be very temperate, you never know what's out there. They could fall, they could get hurt, they could drown, they could meet some sort of danger because they're just 5. And worst case scenario, if they've been taken, the longer you wait every single minute, they're going to be harder and harder to recover.
And so initially, there is this thought by the police that a couple things should have happened. The wandering off is actually high on people's list. That he went outside for whatever reason, he got lost, he went into the woods, he wandered into a field, he couldn't find his way back home, and he's just lost somewhere and we need to find him. I mean, that's their thought. As I said, your number one chief suspects in any case like this would be the parents. Mom is at work. Dad seems to have a rock solid alibi. And then people start thinking, maybe this is one of those rare cases that it really was a stranger abduction. Maybe he was walking down the road and that ubiquitous white van rolled up and someone grabbed him. But as the police start to sharpen their focus and they start to hear rumors and they start to hear things in the community, their attention falls not on some random person and not on any family members, but in fact, some neighbors. Not the same neighbor that he talked to, but 2 neighbors named Sarah and Stacy Wandra. This was a married couple who lived near the Vaughan home. They weren't right next door neighbors, but they were just down the street. And so police began to focus on them. And in sort of the days and weeks that followed, there was a lot of rumors about whether or not they were involved. And then suddenly there was what seemed like a break in the case. Sarah was actually charged in 2022, but not with murder. Rather, with failure to report a death. At the time, her husband was not charged, only her. And this was one of those really interesting decisions by the police. And you have to wonder, was this an attempt to leverage her, right? So basically, we don't think you're the killer. We think Stacy is the killer, but we're going to charge you with not reporting the death and try and flip you to testify against Stacy. It seems like that didn't happen. There is sort of conflicting reporting about why the charges are ultimately dropped. One account said that she was found not competent to stand trial. That doesn't seem to be correct, though, because she was eventually charged and convicted in a separate case, another unrelated aggravated assault. And she is actually currently in an Idaho prison until 2026. So she's in custody right now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. Automate your alternative resolution program with Diversion Manager. Diversion Manager is a proven web-based software platform that automates and manages diversion programs. The platform benefits prosecutors' offices and communities by quickly disposing of system clogging, low-level crimes, holding participants accountable, while providing them with a second chance. Diversion Manager is used by over 600 agencies across the U.S. and provides over 30 online behavior-changing courses addressing a wide variety of traffic and misdemeanor violations, and has been shown to lower recidivism rates. Diversion Manager's advanced workflow automates screening, communication, and disposition, eliminating manual steps. It manages processes including registration, fee handling, and document upload verification, increasing productivity. Your office can dispose of hundreds of cases in a matter of minutes rather than days. If you need the support of our fully functional platform, which can be configured to accommodate the automation and management of alternative programs with advanced workflow, communication, reporting, and integration with your case management system, then you need Diversion Manager. Go to diversionmanager.com/podcast to learn more and to schedule a demonstration of our fully functional platform. And this will be really interesting coming into play later when we talk about charging decisions. This is something that Brett and I deal with all the time when you're looking at a case. And we've said this before, an investigation technically can never be over. Just like a brief can never be finished writing. You just have to decide at some point, this is enough, like the cost benefit marginal, day or weeks or months or resources that you throw at a case is not going to get you the marginal return. So you decide to charge or drop the case. One factor that goes into those charging decisions is how dangerous that person is. Like, how quickly do you need to move? I told you that situation where I had to file for an arrest warrant immediately because I found out that my suspect had booked a ticket to Vietnam and he was going to get out of there, get out of Dodge and out of the country with no extradition within like 12 hours if I didn't move quickly. So
you saw that in the Adelson case. The same thing happened. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. The Adelson case. And so I think this is worth noting because they've publicly named Stacy and Sarah as suspects. You'll see that at least right now with Sarah being in prison, she hasn't been charged yet, but part of that charging decision may be she's not going anywhere right now. We have time to shore up our investigation.
And this case got even crazier when a video was released, I believe, by the mother, Michael's mother. So she received video through a FOIA request that she shouldn't have gotten, and she put it on YouTube.
She really shouldn't have gotten it. This is the classic withholding for active investigation.
Yeah, but you can watch it, and it's a video of Stacy. He is FaceTiming with police officers. So he's like in jail and he is on the phone talking to police officers. He's being videoed and he's like giving them directions. He's like, no, not there. Little further. It's the mound
behind
there.
The bush.
Yeah, exactly. Behind the bush, there's a mound. Well, what he's doing is he is directing the police where he says the body is buried. And in fact, he tells the police that he had nothing to do with this, but he was present while Sarah dug a hole in their backyard to bury Michael. So the police are obviously in the backyard. He is directing them to where the grave is. And he says you're going to find him wrapped in a garbage bag. He says it'll either be black or white. I'm not sure which. We had both color, but just look for a garbage bag. And so they dug up the whole backyard. They didn't find anything, but the dog, they did have cadaver dogs, and cadaver dogs hit on the area, and it led the police to believe that, in fact, a body had been buried there, but it had been moved.
Really interesting. This is all we know from the video. But it's interesting because obviously his wife at the time was charged with failure to report a death, but he's saying that she's the one who dug a grave. We've also said this before in our other podcasts that it's actually pretty hard to dig a grave. It takes a lot of effort because the ground, after you get off the topsoil, basically is pretty hard. It's pretty compacted and it takes some effort. I'm not saying, and I will say, Sarah's a larger woman. She looks to have some heft to her, so she's definitely capable of digging a hole. But he's also a pretty hefty guy. He's definitely capable of moving a shovel around as well. So there's definitely some pitting against, and there may be some reason as to why there's some pitting against each other. They're both serving time for other unrelated crimes, and they're also no longer together right now. I believe they've filed for divorce currently. They are also separated because of different prisons, but they are no longer together, which may lead to some additional incentive to be the first to the cops with information, because the first there will probably get the better deal.
And as Alice said, they are both in prison. We mentioned that Sarah was in prison. Well, Stacy is in prison as well. He was charged a few years ago with possession of a firearm by a felon, which is a federal crime. So he's actually been in federal custody, and he had a release date of October 30th, so only a few days ago. But as so often happens, we all worked together in law enforcement. Before he could be released from federal custody, he was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and destruction of evidence. So despite him saying that Sarah was the one who did it, he is now the one who has current state charges for murder, and those came out only a few days ago. And they came out despite the fact, as we said, and this is one of the reasons we're talking about this case now, despite the fact there's not a lot of information, despite the fact that they have not found a body in this case. They have nevertheless charged Stacy with first-degree murder.
So, despite the fact that Taylor Swift wrote a song called No Body, No Crime, that is not actually true. If there's no body, especially in the case of a 5-year-old, almost for sure there was a crime. You know, it's obviously possible that he wandered off, but you can, in fact, prosecute a case if there is no body. And the standard is the same as in every other criminal case. It's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, are there challenges that come with not having a body? You don't have an autopsy. You don't have a manner of death. You don't even have, per se, death. Because one of the elements you're going to have to show is not only that a crime occurred, but that a death happened, even if you don't have the remains to show it. You can rely on lots of other types of evidence, though. And one of the pieces of evidence we've already told you about, a cadaver dog having hit on the area. We don't know for a fact because they just hit on the fact that there were human remains, not that they were Michael's remains. But when you put it together with other circumstantial evidence, the distance from the house, I think it's about half a mile away, so walking distance, definitely opportunity, environment to be there. This is not some other town where the two have never met. They are neighbors. They're within walking distance, and he was last reported to be outside, turned away from this play date, walking outside, and the father at the same time was inside, predisposed with changing a diaper, so not having his eyes on his son. And then you have this additional cadaver dog hitting on the Stacy and Sarah's land, and then at least one of them saying the body was buried there, going so far as to describe how it was wrapped before being buried, indicating that at least 2 people, if not more, saw the boy dead. So you have the words. Now they obviously have credibility issues of how much they're lying and how much they're telling the truth. But this is what you're looking at in terms of showing that there in fact was a crime. And it's just like really any other case, because we've always told you that direct evidence and circumstantial evidence are weighted the same in the court of law. And oftentimes we'll hear people say, well, if I didn't see it, then I don't know. Then there's reasonable doubt. So we face that issue even when we have a body before us. We have this even when we have direct evidence, eyewitnesses who see something, or say a security camera that captures something happen. Even in those instances, we face these questions from people who say, well, how do you know there isn't reasonable doubt? That video is grainy, or that person's eyesight may have been faulty because they didn't have their glasses on and it was dark at night and they were at a distance. So how do you know that they really saw what they saw? So while there are challenges when you prosecute a case with no body, there actually similar challenges to even when you do have a body.
You know, we saw this in the Karen Reed case. A lot of people said, if the state can't tell me exactly how John died, then that's reasonable doubt. I can't convict. And it's like, well, that's not actually the standard. You know, if you think she hit him and he died, then you can find her guilty, even if the mechanism of his death is very difficult to figure out. Like, did he hit his head on the back of the car or on the ground or on the sidewalk or on the fire hydrant? You know, like all that stuff. Those are all great questions that you'd love to know, but they don't necessarily mean that you have any reasonable doubt about who did it. And these no body cases were always something that we would point to when we're talking to people about that. Look, there are cases where we have no idea how the person was murdered. We never even found the body. Even in the Peterson case, Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson murder, we found the bodies, and those bodies, because of where they were and the currents and the things he was looking up and the fact he went there the day of the murders and the fact he went back there later, all that stuff is great proof that he did it. We don't know how he did it. There wasn't enough of the body for us to know. Did he strangle her? Did he smother her? Did he stab her? Did he shoot her? Like, we can't say any of that, but we don't have to know that. It's just like how you don't have to know what the motive is. Those are all great things to know, and they can help get you to beyond a reasonable doubt, but they're not required. There's no single piece of evidence that is required to prove a case. The only question is, does all the evidence you have add up to beyond a reasonable doubt? The only exception to that is confessions do require some piece of corroborating evidence, but it's usually a pretty low bar. So now I'll say this. Alice went through some of the evidence that we've been told there is in this case. You know, we know the dogs, you had a hit. We know he said that she buried the body there. There are some sort of eyewitnesses who put him in the area. The prosecution has said they have, quote, substantial evidence of how this crime went down. And hopefully they have a lot more than what we know. I do want to compare this briefly to a case that I think we talked about this on Court TV. Maybe you talked about it on Court TV. Somebody talked about it on Court TV. It's the Bott case in Virginia, Naresh Bott and Mamta Bott. So a woman goes missing in Virginia. She and her husband had been having a lot of problems. He had made a lot of statements. All of a sudden, she's gone. Well, there's also a ton of blood in the bedroom and in the bathroom. And that's a key fact, right? Because we're talking, once again, you have to prove that they're dead, that they didn't just leave. Something like that is a really good piece of evidence, because it's hard to explain that is not a death. Now, you have to prove a death in every case. It's just usually you have a body to do it. One of the reasons that in a murder case, you show photographs of the victim, you talk through the autopsy. I mean, part of that is to prove the person did it, but it's also to prove that you have someone who is deceased and that they are not deceased for natural causes. Right? That's the first hurdle you have to get over. There's a huge challenge here, because not only is he charged with murder, he's charged with first-degree murder. So at some point, the prosecution is going to have to put together a story that has some evidence to back it up to convince a jury that the child is dead and they are the reason.
At least because this is also fresh and this is a state case, so unlike federal cases where things are filed, I know the docketing system, whereas with each jurisdiction, they have their own docketing system. I couldn't find the arrest warrant because I wanted to see what other evidence they had. I think that's fine. You don't need to lay it all out for me right now, but I am hoping, because we don't have a body, you're going to have multiple kind of nets of circumstantial evidence. And one powerful piece, because at first, you'll hear a bunch of people in the news say, no body, they can't prove anything. All they have is some FaceTime where he's trying to throw his ex-wife under the bus, but they didn't find anything. And who knows, maybe the remains that the dogs hit on was a false remains. Maybe it was a dead squirrel or something like that. This isn't very much evidence. I agree. It doesn't seem like a ton, especially if you're going for first degree murder. But this is 2021 when this happens, which means there's cell phones, there's text messages, there's clouds, there's photographs, there's lots of electronic forensic evidence that can exist. I'm not saying it does here, but I've heard nothing of that sort. And for the prosecutors to feel strong enough to move forward, for me as a prosecutor, That type of evidence can be very powerful because it doesn't depend on eyewitnesses, an autopsy report, human remains, those sorts of things. So if you think of the search warrants that were executed in the Aisha Degree case recently, there's been no arrest in that case, but part of the reason there was a break in the case after many years of seemingly dead ends were cloud accounts and text messages that were able to be recovered in current time, talking about maybe guilty consciences or maybe knowing something from the past. So I am hopeful that when the prosecutors say there's substantial evidence, it's something of that sort. And I'm fine if we, the public, don't know that until we get closer to a trial.
And let me say this, by the time this episode comes out, maybe we will know more. I mean, we're right on top of this one. This is where we're being
very rare
newsy
for us
with this one. I know.
Really
very
rare for us to be on such breaking news.
So here's a scenario I could imagine. They know he's getting out around on October 30th. By the way, little tip for you guys out there. If someone's in federal custody and you want to know when they're going to get out, you can go to bop.gov/locator and look them up, and it'll tell you exactly when they're supposed to get out of prison. It'll give you their release date.
I did this all the time for habeas death penalty cases that were remanded, and for whatever reason, because of all the different cases that I worked on as a clerk.
There you go.
Specifically, I always checked on the really heinous murder cases because I was like, you know what? They have a lot of time to think about who they want to get when they get out, if they ever get out. So I'm just going to check on them.
I just looked up Sean Combs while we were talking about this. He's at Fort Dix, FCI, and his release date is May 8th, 2028. So very easy to do that if you want to do that. So anyways, so they knew he was getting out. And I can imagine a scenario where they call up the wife and they're like, hey, you're in prison until 2026. If you want to get out in 2026, / if you want to get out earlier than 2026, we want to wrap this up and we don't want him to get out. So now is your chance. This is your one opportunity to cooperate. Give us the evidence, tell us where the body's buried, et cetera, et cetera. And they use that. And that would also be a possible reason why maybe that affidavit has not been released yet, because they may be in the process of gathering evidence, maybe even finding a body to do this. But we don't know for certain. One thing people in the chat asked was about spousal privilege. Now, we have a Legal Briefs episode on this. You should go listen to it if you want to. But just a quick refresher, since that could become important in this case. There are two types of spousal privilege. There is the privilege against testifying against your spouse, and there is the marital communications privilege. The first one is a privilege that you hold where you cannot be forced to testify against your spouse.
And the interesting thing about that is there's no corollary for a parent to their child, because oftentimes I'll hear people say, that seems to be the stronger bond where you can't, or a mother doesn't want to testify against their child versus, even if they're in good terms, a wife testifying against their husband. So just note that this is really just so it can be sacred, because, pillow talk. Who are you with all day long? Your spouse. And so to find that marriage and the communications within that marriage sacred. But it's only when you are married. So the night before you're married and you're talking to them and you confess to a murder, there's no spousal communication privilege there. It is quite literally the communications while you are legally husband and wife. So when you divorce, it doesn't retroactively make the communications while you are married no longer subject to spousal communications privilege, but everything after that, just because now that you are exes, do not fall under that privilege. And one person can't waive it. Both people have to waive that privilege for you guys to be able to talk about it.
And there's an exception, which almost certainly applies here, which is the crime fraud exception. So if your communication is you're both conspiring about how to hide a body, for instance, that would be something that doesn't fall under the privilege. Now, if you're just an innocent wife and your husband comes to you and says, I murdered 37 people. I just want you to know because I don't want there to be any secrets between us. You cannot testify about that. That is privileged. Now, if he does that because you saw him dragging a body out the back door, you can testify to what you saw. But you can't be forced to testify to what you saw. if you're married at the time. So, for instance, if they are truly divorced, that's just out the window. Like, if they're no longer married, that privilege doesn't even apply. So she could be forced to testify, but she can't be forced to testify about communications unless, as is almost certainly the case here, any communications are actually related to the crime itself.
So in this case, we've kind of circled around what that substantial evidence can be. In these early stages, when there's just been an arrest warrant filed, we know pretty little about the case. You've already heard about it earlier in this episode, but essentially it's statements by Sarah Wandra indicating knowledge of the crime, a video of Stacy that was accidentally released in FOIA request to the mom of Michael who put it up. And she said she did it because she was so frustrated that the case was going nowhere. So look, if they messed up by giving it to her, I don't know, power to her.
I also read somewhere that she has a terminal illness, which I hope that's really incorrect, sad. But I didn't read that. And that she was very hopeful they could solve the case before she passed away. So I hope that's misreported, but if it wasn't misreported, then, you know, that's another pressure point on the prosecution and the police to move forward. Talk about a tough call, because you also have to be very protective of your case because you only get one shot.
Right. So that video, as Brett earlier described, is of Stacy in a orange jumpsuit, FaceTiming with police around him, telling them where to look for Michael's body. But of course, they don't find it. They say that there's forensic and digital evidence seized from the Wandra home. And there's possible eyewitnesses placing Michael near the property. But again, that timeline is, we're not exactly sure right now what the timeline is. So it could have been earlier in the day, much not close in time. But the closest of the homes themselves, I think, lends itself to more access to Michael. Whatever the case is, the prosecutors do claim there's some substantial evidence despite this lack of body. And they had to make that call without a body because you're always hoping to find that body, whether to move forward with the case or not. And they decided to move forward. And I do not think it's unrelated to the fact that he was released on October 30th. I will say this. When Brett says, you know, the feds and the locals in the state, they work together. So I would have all these like pending felon in possession cases or something else where it's like you hold it in your back pocket because they're in state custody. You don't need to go get them off the streets for danger reasons because they're in state custody. So when I get one of those cases, I'm like, okay, this is not pressing. Statute of limitations isn't going to run anytime soon. I could do a little more investigation on this case, or I have like a kidnapping that I want to work on right away. So I'll look them up in the system, see where they are, call the either state prosecutor or the investigator or the prison that they're in and be like, hey, look, if for some reason the date changes, he's going to get out sooner rather than later. Before you let him out, could you just give me a heads up? Because it looks like he's going to be in there for the next 7 years, you know, so I don't have to run and get these charges filed tomorrow. And they're like, yes, of course. On more than one occasion, they forgot to call me. And then I had to rush because they either just got out and we wanted to grab them as soon as possible, knowing that they were going to flee, or just that they're dangerous and we don't want them on the streets. So that's, while there is coordination, it's only as good as the people involved. But this is obviously a very high profile case. So I do think that they very much were keeping tabs and talking with each other.
Yeah, that happens more often than it should.
Just want to pull behind the curtain a little bit and let you see what's going on.
It's a lot easier to find somebody when they're in custody.
Exactly.
I had a case recently where a guy, he was supposed to be going away for life for murder. So I had a case on him. And I was like, well, I'm not going to worry about that one because he's going to be gone forever. And then like a couple years pass. All of a sudden I get a filing that he wants to be out on work release. And I'm like, work release? You're supposed to be in prison forever. And it turned out they dropped the charges. So that didn't happen. So I had to ride to the rescue and bring some justice in that case, which I did. But nevertheless, like, nobody told us about that, and it's the example of miscommunications can happen. But as Alice said, this was a case where I think they were following pretty closely, so they knew when he was going to get out. Now, look, I am worried about this case because the fact that the timing just so happens to coincide with when he's going to get out, maybe they were fully ready to go at that point, but it does make you think, are they moving faster than they want to? Are they really ready to do this? I hope they are. We don't know. I mean, we are very much in the dark on this about what exact evidence they have, but we're just going to have to see.
Well, we'll follow this case, certainly, and I do think more information will come out soon. But this really does raise a lot of interesting questions, because I've heard a lot of you singing the No Body, No Crime song, and also just generally asking, how can you possibly move forward? And this is a deterrent to all you criminals out there who are thinking, if I just hide the body well enough, I can never be prosecuted. Not true whatsoever. So why don't you save us some time and just let us recover the body? Because here's the thing. Even though there is an arrest warrant and the prosecution is moving forward with this case, there is no justice at the end of the day for Michael's family, his parents, until they recover Michael. I think it's very clear that, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Even if it were an accident, a 5-year-old is not going to be okay 4 years later by himself. Something would have happened by this point. So that's very sad. And the only thing worse than the knowledge that he is no longer with us is that they can't find his body for his parents. And they've said this. So if there is any information out there, look, if Stacy, Sandra, whoever is involved are already caught, the least they can do is tell investigators where Michael's body is so that they can recover him. So there's still a lot going on. And here's the other thing. They could very much recover the body while this case is pending. And that could change the whole game, change the whole prosecution's theory. But I am hopeful that they do, in fact, have that substantial evidence. And we will see where this leads. And hopefully there will be justice for Michael, but also justice for his family in bringing him home.
I agree 100%. And one thing that'll be interesting about this is there have been no body prosecutions before. But usually they do involve something like the case out of Virginia, the sort of bloody crime scene or something like that. Depending on what the evidence is they have here, this could be a very sort of 21st century no body crime, where really you just have a lot of technical forensics, phone forensics, that sort of thing, and you're able to build a case based on that. So that could be pretty interesting. I mean, this could be the kind of case that really sort of sets a precedent for that and makes it easier to pursue these cases, because it's a brave prosecutor who'll do it. I don't think every jurisdiction would be open to prosecuting if you did not have a body. Well, Alice, I think that's all we have on this. Do you want to answer a question real fast?
Absolutely.
I mean, this episode's about twice as long as we thought Legal Briefs would be, so it's a short episode compared to what we...
We really did plan on these 20-minute episodes.
Yeah, it was supposed to be about 20 minutes. That was the goal.
Oh, my goodness.
And here we are. Okay, let's see. I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe you can answer this. This is from Desharlie, and I don't know if that's actually their name, but I like it. Desharlie. Desharlie wants to know, how did criminal defense attorneys live with the moral dilemma of representing someone they know is guilty and be able to go on so far as accusing innocent people on behalf of their client when they know their accusations against those people aren't true and they're just throwing stuff against the wall to see if it will stick?
Great question. I know we've talked about this before, especially in our love letter to a defense attorney Legal Briefs episode. That's not what it's called, but that's essentially what we talk about.
Pretty close, yeah.
So there's a different way of framing it. It's not necessarily that you are having to defend someone who has done it. In fact, you should go into criminal defense work with the assumption that your person probably did it. I think your life would be easier and you could do your job better if that's the case. Now, what you have, though, is a very important constitutional duty to ensure that the adversarial system works and that you as the defense attorney hold the prosecution up to their burden of proof. Because both sides have immense power in upholding the constitutional rights of individuals who are charged with criminal. So now, I am not built to be a defense attorney. I do think there's a lot of creativity in being a defense attorney, especially when you're starting out with the knowledge, okay, my guy did it. But doesn't mean what we don't have in this country is, even if you have 100 eyewitnesses and everyone watches you stab a guy in a parking lot, what doesn't happen is you don't get arrested and sentenced right there in the parking lot. we actually have a judicial system, even when it seems like an open and shut case. And that's because there are so many elements at play here. And we want to make sure that constitutional rights are protected. So I think defense attorneys have a very, very important role in the criminal justice system. But I do agree that it takes like a different kind of personality and a different kind of drive. My friends who are criminal defense attorneys love it because it is like the most creative of professions. I mean, you are really having to like thread needles and make sure that the testimony fits together because there's still a story to be told on both sides of the V. While I, as the prosecutor, think that you do that vigorous defense, but at the end of the day, I think the evidence shows that you should be convicted of the crime and that is the just outcome. The defense may also think the same thing, but they want to make sure that, again, the justice system works in a way that is constitutional.
Yeah, and look, I'd love to be a defense attorney. I think it'd be so much fun. And I've thought about it a lot, but it's just, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if telling myself I'm upholding the constitutional rights of my client would be enough. Now, look, I think there are some defense attorneys who view that as their job. My job is to make sure constitutional rights are upheld. That doesn't mean that I have to go into a trial and do everything possible. Like, it doesn't mean, because some defense attorneys will say your job is to do whatever it takes to get your client off. Right. I think there are some defense attorneys that don't feel that way, who would never accuse an innocent person of doing it if they knew they were innocent. They would never do that. Right. Like, they just have their own moral code. Like, I'll make sure your constitutional rights for search and seizure were honored. I will vigorously cross-examine witnesses. I will hold the prosecution to their burden, but I'm not going to accuse innocent people of a crime I know they didn't commit. I don't know. As I've said, I'm fascinated by the whole, what is the ethical code of a defense attorney? Because I think it's really hard to define. It's easy to define for prosecutors, but it's hard for defense attorneys. And I remember I only took one criminal law class in law school.
You know what? I don't
required.
even think I took criminal law.
There you go.
I
we
really
were
didn't.
required to take criminal law.
You're not required, no.
We were.
Oh,
we had to take it.
I'm sorry. There's so little required, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Now, I'll say this. While I was there, they changed the curriculum. And now I don't know if it is required. But at the time, the standard sort of traditional way we've been doing it for 150 years, I actually got an argument with Dean Kagan, now Justice Kagan at the time, because I was on the SGA or whatever, and they want to change the curriculum. And I was like, we've been doing this for 150 years. Like, these are really important things. I think they should be taught. And she was like, well, just because we've been doing it for 150 years doesn't mean we should keep doing it. And I was like, well, okay, that's an argument, but that doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't, but anyway, we had torts, property, criminal law, contracts. I think those were the 4 required. Civil procedure, the 5.
It's really embarrassing. We weren't. We only had to take about 2/3 of that.
My torts professor didn't believe in torts, so just because I took a class called torts doesn't mean I learned anything about torts. But anyways, the whole point of the story, Dershowitz was my criminal law professor, and he would talk about this stuff a lot because he obviously, defended OJ, defended a bunch of people, and he was like, he gave sort of a hypothetical. Like, let's say you were a doctor, right? You're a doctor. You're an emergency room physician, and the police show up with an ambulance and they roll Hitler in on a gurney and he's been in a car wreck. Are you going to treat him? And everybody was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's your oath that you take as a doctor, is you treat whoever comes in front of you. So even if it's Hitler, you got to treat him, right? And he was like, it's the same thing. Like, in his mind, the exact same thing. If you're a defense attorney, it does not matter who comes before you. You have to defend them, and you have to give them all of your ability and all of your training in the same way you would if you were an emergency room doctor. So that was what he said. That was his explanation of it. I get that. I still think it would be really hard. It would be really hard for me to be super creative and convincing and beguile a jury into acquitting someone who killed someone. That would be really hard for me. I would feel really bad walking out of the courtroom afterwards thinking, man, I just got this killer off, but that's what you got to do. And I don't know. I do think it takes a special person to do it. So that's my answer.
Good answer.
I don't know if you have any other.
No, I think that's right. I think it's important work. I don't think that I'm cut out for it. And I don't think that the defense attorney should not be denigrated for representing people who they think did it, because that's not the goal shouldn't just be to get them off. The goal should be to hold the prosecution to their burden of proof.
I like that. There you go. Change your ways, defense attorneys. All right. I think that's all I got.
That's all I got. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Let us know if there's cases that are hitting the news that you would like to hear about. Additional SCOTUS cases, because we covered just 5 of them last time. There is always more to talk about, but this particular podcast is for you. If you want to have your question answered, leave a 5-star review, ask a question, we will answer it. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutors Legal Briefs.
To the 58 of you who are here, I literally sent this out 5 minutes ago. So.
Yeah, y'all are amazing.
Amazing.
And especially with daylight savings, like, I'm real tired because it's like an hour later normally. My kids are not. In fact, I hear one stomping upstairs, but you know what? It is what it is.
It is what it is.
All right.
We can just go back and forth. I didn't put our names
that's
on
fine.
it.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. I'll start. You can start whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter.
I was going to introduce us.
Sounds perfect. Do that.
This November, action is free on Pluto TV. Go on the run with Jack Reacher.
Every suspect was a train killer.
Then buckle up for Drive, World War Z,
Every human being we save is one less fight.
and Charlie's Angels.
Damn, I hate to fly.
Launch into sci-fi adventure with The Fifth Element and laugh through the mayhem in Tropic Thunder.
What is going on here?
All the thrills, all for free. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.